just to get a sense check of the room, first of all. This talk is about how to get in, and so let's talk about what stage people's children are at. If you've got a child who is under the age, you're thinking about nursery entry. Can you put your hand up? Okay, great. Some nursery entries. Some people who are thinking about first schools, like pre-preps, 4+ entry. Yep, got some hands up there. People who are thinking about senior schools. Yeah, a lot of those. Okay, so there are fewer at the lower end, so we'll slightly shuffle the conversation along to make sure we talk quite a lot about the senior school end, but we're going to begin with talking about nursery and pre-prep. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to be comparing schools inside London and schools outside London to get a sense of how different the market is in those two places. So I'd like to introduce our panel and explain what each of them is here to do. So I've got here Magoo Giles, who was founder and is principal of Knightsbridge School, which is about as central as you could get in terms of a London school. And then Joe Lewis, who's from St Ronan School in Kent, who's going to give a perspective from outside the M25. Are you outside the M25?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. And you could not be in Kent. I mean, there are a few bits that are inside the M25, aren't there?
Bucolic bliss where we are.
Yeah. And then William Petty, who's Director of Education at Bonas MacFarlane. And Will's here because he advises, he's a parent himself, but he has advised hundreds and hundreds of parents and helped them navigate through school choices. So he's here to give the voice of the parent. But we will probably have some time for questions at the end. We'll see how we get on. So I'm going to start with Magoo. And I'm going to, I'd like you to locate your school a bit and tell us sort of where your parents come from and sort of where they then go afterwards.
All right, good morning, everybody. So Knightsbridge School, I founded it in 2006. It's our 20th year this year. And when we founded it, we went to 11, like most normal schools, the end of primary. Pushed it to 13. We now go to 16. It's very, very exciting. It's a great time for parents at the moment. You're all hopefully parents in the audience. So it's a really good time for you with the number of schools out there and the number of changes that are happening. So Knightsbridge School, we've had to adapt. And everybody, the old adage of storm, norm, perform, which I used to use, we now actually just literally, we say sporm, because everybody is going at such a pace that they're having to change and adapt all the time. So Knightsbridge School is no exception to that. So it's very, very busy. It's a school that attracts the most wonderful people from all around the world. I like to think we have an English sort of, if you like, a sort of real flavour, but we are very much geared towards that international family that wants the languages, but also wants the Englishness, also wants to get into any school that the parents want them to get into. But in my view, it's the right school for the individual child. We have to be looking at that, certainly from a Knightsbridge School's perspective, but most schools, it's deliciously changed, I think, from what it used to be, which was very much an academic, to much more of a, yes, academic, but also the roundedness that we have to have. So every school has to have that.
Just in one sentence, then.
Yeah.
Where do they live? Roughly when they come in at 4. How far away? How far away from you?
Well, when I first started, it was walk to school. I wanted to say that, and everyone tried to do that. We had buses that brought them in and everything else. Now, actually, there are so many wonderful ways of getting to school, walk and talk. So they're around school. That's a day school.
Yeah.
But actually, people come from quite a long way away. We have bursary students.
Like a mile, 2 miles, or further?
Yeah, 2 to 5. Some people actually make a real effort to come from a long way away, 10 miles, if in terms of...
Yeah, okay. And then for senior school, how far do they go then? Just really quickly in a kind of...
Yeah, the seniors are a bit further away. They're allowed to travel on their own.
Yeah, so that's a common pattern, actually. So in terms of getting a framework for defining where you're looking, that when they're younger, people tend to choose schools closer to where they live. Do you see something similar in Kent, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning, everyone. My school is more of a traditional prep school, 2 to 13. And so we see people coming in nursery and pre-prep and generally staying all the way through to 13 plus. And then, as you say, they will go further afield. But generally speaking, we see families moving out of London with young children who are looking for an all-round education. They'll come in into the nursery and pre-prep and then want to stay to 13. And then usually in between years 4 to 6, we'll begin to talk to them about senior schools and what would suit them as an individual. And then we will invariably find exactly the right fit for them at 13 plus. And luckily we're surrounded by excellent senior schools. As you say, it's a very exciting time. And in Kent and Sussex, they will go to the right school for them at 13 plus.
Right. Now, what we're going to do to make sense of our brief audience survey at the beginning, I'm going to put nurseries and pre-preps together as a kind of category so that we've got plenty of time to talk about senior school entry. So I'm going to start with Will. What age do you think people should start looking for nurseries and pre-preps?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. There are still quite a lot of our nursery schools in London, certainly, who are operating a closest to birth registration sort of preference. It doesn't necessarily mean that, if you haven't done that, it's you're in trouble. And of course, as Magoo was saying, there's so much change happening now, and there are lots more options than there used to be, particularly on the nursery front. Actually, there's been quite a sort of surge in nurseries for good reason. There weren't enough, frankly, in the right areas, and that has changed recently. And some of them will kind of let you wait a bit longer, but given that you're starting when your child's 2.5, closest to birth is not actually that wild in terms of how far forward, but it is something you want to think about straight out of the gate. And they're also pre-prep schools, or prep schools for the sake of confusion, those that start at reception, so the 4+ schools. A lot of them still have a closest to birth registration, but increasing numbers of those ones have actually kind of tried to take the edge off that craziness, because it's quite a lot becoming a parent for the first time, or second or third or fourth. And some of them have a sort of delayed one, so they won't let you do anything until your child is 1 or at a later date. But it tends to be to be safe, get in there early. And that allows you to, fine, you have to pay a registration fee, and it might seem a bit odd because you're not going to see much action for a bit. But at least then that's done, and then you can come back around to visiting a bit more gently and, focus on being a parent, and then come around to the visiting of the schools and the choice later. Okay, so Will is saying that it's still pretty competitive for nursery and prep school entry, and you need to act relatively young, even though it's becoming a bit less stressed than it was. Is that how you see it, Magoo?
Well, I think yes, but I also think that times have changed. I think don't worry. I think the key thing for me is I used to be in the army years and years ago. It's about sort of, when you have a baby, it's a blank piece of paper. It's like a car that's never been filled up with petrol before. A beautiful little person, and we're filling it up with information. We're getting it we've got a plan, as Will says, but I think the schools, there are a lot of them, and there's a wonderful schools here, but there's a lot more schools as well. So visit them, get in touch with them if you can, the ones that you really think you're going to be, and start that relationship as early as you can, as Will said, and then hopefully you've got a good relationship to go forward.
And in Kent, are people registering at birth, or is it later usually? Yeah,
I say we're 2 to 13, so we would encourage them to. We do see families coming round with babies, and generally registering around the age of 1 for that entry point. And I would back up what Magoo said around just having a feel and taking the pulse of a nursery or a pre-prep, and you'll have a gut instinct towards it. At that age, it's not really about achievement; it's about their personal development. And so do just have a look about how they're interacting with the staff, and generally you'll come away with a feeling about a place. And so I would encourage you to look at no more than 5, and generally have a pool which will narrow it down to when they will either join at 2 or 3.
So what we're getting here is I mean, this is obviously what schools would like you to do as a parent. In reality, you're probably, well, if you're like me, you're a bit disorganised, and you may not have done it at birth or at 1. So what happens if you've got a 2-year-old and you need nursery place like next term? Would you be able to cope with that, for example, or would you be able to cope with that?
Well, yes, one hopes, but we're a popular school, and so we have parents asking all the time, do you have space? And we're very quick to answer that. So generally, we want to accommodate young families moving out of London. We want them to come in from an early age and stay with us all the way through. So absolutely, we generally look to accommodate, but obviously at that age, the ratios are so important. So we just have to bear that in mind when we're accepting families.
I think in London, it has changed a bit. I think certainly Helen and the team at Knightsbridge School in particular, and I think other schools as well, there are places. So don't worry. I think the key thing, please don't worry. Build a relationship with whichever schools you're interested in, and by all means aim high. I think it's great to have lots of children coming and visiting and finding out if that is indeed the right place for them. And for you, the parents, it might not be right for you, but it might be right for your child.
Yeah, so this is the big change from a decade ago. There's a birth rate bulge going through that's currently about 12. And if you're in the lucky position of having a 0 to 4-year-old, like outstanding primary schools have got spaces, it's a very different place from what it was like a decade ago. The one last question I'd like to ask about at this entry point, you've got a choice whether you go to a standalone nursery or one that's connected to a school, and I guess that is quite a choice. So, do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely wonderful. Which we a lot of the nurseries that are standalone serve us. They send lots of wonderful children to us. We have a fantastic relationship with them. I think it's the same with our own nursery. Some of the siblings tend to come into our nursery because we're trying to help the parents with one drop-off rather than two. It's just working together as a team, overcoming some of the challenges and making sure that we have a really good relationship with the nurseries.
Yeah, I would agree. Family logistics are so important, and often it involves siblings, and they're following on to their brothers and sisters. So you have to look at that and plan accordingly. I would say standalones, we have our own nursery and pre-prep, and generally when they come to us, they stay all the way to 13. And I suppose one of the advantages of that is that although they live in their own nursery and pre-prep house in the middle of the school, they get to use all the facilities of the prep school, so the music, the sport, the grounds, and the amazing extracurricular activities as well. So that can be a real strength of a nursery and pre-prep that is linked to a prep school.
Okay, well that leads us very nicely into the next big kind of question, really, which is a huge one in London these days, but across the sector, we've increasingly got schools that run all the way from 2 to 18. I'm not sure that anyone's really thought about this as an educational decision. It's more of a kind of like, for all sorts of marketing reasons or the way schools have come together and merged. That's what we've ended up with. I actually went to the same school from 8 to 18. It was a choir school that had a senior school attached, and it was far too long, I thought. But and I think there's a lot to be said for transitions and changes and moving schools. But that is an old-fashioned view now, and I wonder what you think about. You've got a traditional prep school. You're now going to 16. Whether parents should be signing up for long chunks of time in a single school.
I'll go first if that's all right. So the reason we went older initially was because the parents wanted it. Parents loved it. Environment, they wanted it to go older, to carry on, because a lot of secondary you hear some horror stories about some secondary schools about how the children find it difficult to get involved, assimilate and get on. So they wanted that, and a lot of the parents themselves when they were younger went to a school that went all the way through. So they think, well, why can't we do that? Anyway, so we pandered slightly in Knightsbridge to the parent and us going older, which we did. And actually, it's been a huge success because it means the older children, it's a family, it's a community. The parents love it because it's close to them. They get the children a bit longer. But obviously, there are disadvantages as well because the children are slightly bigger and it's in London. We don't have the green grass that perhaps the country schools have. So there are some good things and not so good things. But actually, we're communicating. We're trying to work together to give what today's sort of education wants.
Yeah, I would say it's all about the individual with these decisions, and for some children it will suit them to be in that safe environment all the way through, and for others the change is an excellent option, whether that be at 11 or 13 exit to a senior school. So I'd say, as with most decisions, it's all about the individual, about where they're developing academically, personally, and at what stage you think would be appropriate for them to move on, and maybe experience a different environment which would suit, again, their adolescence. One point on the back of that, I would say, is that for me personally, I think those last 2 years of prep school to 13 plus are quite transformative. And they get all the attention, and the staff body pour their energy into those last 2 years, which can be quite compelling arguments for them to stay to 13 before they go on to a senior school.
I guess the one question I would throw back at that is with your 4-year-old, when you're choosing like a through school versus a standalone prep school, I mean, you don't know what they're going to be like at school. You've just got to guess it. And it's really, I guess, what you want at that point rather than what they want, if one's going to be honest about what's being...
Yeah, I would agree. I think what we're seeing is a shift in maybe, the dynamism and frenetic lifestyles that we're seeing, and parents are more likely or leading to choosing schools that will suit their lifestyle, quite possibly over the child at that age. And we're seeing a lot of movement around wraparound care, what will suit the family between certain times in the day, so to take away the stress of everyday life. And then as they move up through the school, then you probably have more flexibility, and then you can begin to make decisions about whether you think they should stay 11 plus, 13 plus, or quite possibly all the way through to 16 or 18.
Okay, so this is all sounding really cosy and really nice, which is kind of not how parents generally think school admissions is, particularly in London. So I'm going to turn to Will to give a slightly different view about this. We're going to talk about assessments and entry at 4 plus, 7 and 8 plus, and then 11 plus, because this is sort of what this through thing's all about, which is if you get them in at 4 or get them in at 7, you might not have to do it later on. And there's a sort of strategic game going on. Like, is it, for example, easier to get into St Paul's at 7 plus to Collet Court versus 13 plus to go into the senior school? So the question I want to ask you really is, what's the assessment landscape like for young children, and then how does it change as they get older, and how much should parents be anxious about this?
Yeah, well, it's great to sort of be up here with two school leaders who are reducing anxiety, and actually that despite how the behaviour is panning out, that's what all school leaders, hopefully good ones, are encouraging, because that's not healthy for anybody. But the reality is, this is the land of selection, and at 4 plus there are lots of prep schools, particularly in London, who don't select. Your child won't have to have an assessment, and then there the other group who will do. And let's bear in mind, it's called the 4 plus assessment. Well, it's 4 entry at 4 plus. It happens when they're 3. My own children did it when they were just 3, and quite understandably, I have twins. My daughter took one look at the assessment room, burst into tears, and ran into my arms during a mid-school tour, which for a man in my position was not ideal. But she was quite right. I kind of agreed with her, and I then felt instantly terrible about having put her through it anyway. So there is a mix, and you have to go look at that mix. And at 4, it's really quite a tricky one. But I would say to every parent, you should have some schools that you're considering that don't do assessments, and then some that do. And that's a way of sort of hedging your bets. At 7 and 8, the 7 and 8 is quite specific. That is historically the entry point for the London, particularly the London prep schools these days, who are overtly selective, and unashamedly so. That's their school, that's what they're offering. We're sat next to one right now. And what you are seeing, though, is a lot of those schools expanding downwards vertically to start offering reception year 1, year 2. So there's change there. The 7 and 8 plus are fairly similar, and even there's been a shift there. So the schools that offer both of those entry points tend to be weighting towards the 7 now, and a lot of this is financial. They need more fee payers in. Obviously, we all know that the pressures of their finances are greater than they've ever been before. So one cannot be critical of that. They're in survival mode in some cases. They've got to assure their future. The 11 plus is obviously the big one. That's the first one where, particularly in London, the London parents start to, and freak out, frankly. me included, even though what I've done for a living for 10 years and 20 years. And, it's a lot. And because so many people are doing it, the parent paranoia and hysteria is really palpable, particularly in a large city. And, yes, try not to worry, but you will inescapably worry. What you have to try and do is hold your nerve, seek out the right information, talk to your prep school heads and their head of future schools, or whichever title they have, that there'll be other people as well as their class teachers, who are great places to start looking for information and to start trying to calm yourself down by doing your homework. It's not all about the kids. You've got to do quite a bit for them to begin with. And it's a necessary evil, but it isn't evil. The 11 Plus is not designed to upset people and catch people out. So your research is absolutely vital, because 11 Plus is there as one of the mechanisms, one of several, that schools will use to make sure that you're right about choosing them for your child. And I think people look at it and go like, no, we've got to do this and that. Well, hang on, no, what you've got to do is think about the school that's right for your child. If you get that bit right, the 11 Plus should work out perfectly okay, barring a disaster. So it's really important to be thorough about that, and not to sort of look at the schools as if they're trying to, pick you out and rule you out. They're not. They're trying to get the best fit that they know works for them and their students.
So just to give a broad, quick summary of that, 4 Plus, like, not many schools do assessment, but some do. And like, for example, there's a very well-known girls' prep school in Hammersmith that has a tombola, puts names in a tombola.
Yeah, there's a ballot system for the schools that select.
And then, so there is a form of selection, but it can be quite random and weird at 4. At 7 and 8 Plus, it can get pretty competitive.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, and for the schools that do select, and then most schools have some sort of assessment of 11 Plus. Is that a reasonable summary of the London position?
Certainly from London, yes.
Yeah, and is that the same in Kent?
No. I would say probably a bit more relaxed, which is wonderful for me. So I would say that we're generally not assessing during their prep school years. And really, I would say on the back of the 11 Plus, that's when they begin to look at the ISEB test, which some of you may know as the what a lot of the senior schools use as a baseline test to identify their academic baseline around what type of school they should be going to at 13 Plus, and that generally takes place around now after half term, autumn term, year 6, and that's a really good indicator around what type of academic level they should be heading for, and what type of stretch they need, and how they'll be supported. And so for me, I would say that's a really key year 6 age point where we'll begin to have the conversation. They'll sit the test, they'll have the result, and then we will begin to narrow those schools down for 13 Plus, having sat the ISEB.
Okay, great. So I think we're now turning to the topic that most of you put your hand up about, which is about senior school entry in London and outside London, and what it's like. So what's the market looking like?
Well, the market, again, as I said at the beginning, I think you're in a great market. It is competitive. We've heard that. It's going to be competitive. You want it to be. Most parents want it to be competitive. They want to aim high, and that's okay. Aim high, but work with the school. Whichever school you're at, work with them. The lovely thing about independent schools is they really want to work with you, and they want to get the right school for your child. May not be always right for you, but I think for me, the key thing is work with the school. And in year 4, year 5, you'll have these interviews. What are you thinking about? Have you been to see them, if they allow you? And then, of course, you do this ISEB test, or you do certain other tests, London tests, to get into schools, whichever they are. That's okay. The kids know they're coming. The kids want to do them. Some of them don't. Some of them perhaps don't want to go to those schools. So let's listen to the children at that stage as well, because I think that's important. We've got to get them involved and get them into the market. And then you've got all these other wonderful people here to help do the certain things that we need to do. But please don't take them off their sport. Please don't take them off their arts, their performing arts. Please don't take them off all the fun stuff. Or it's not fun stuff, it's hard work. But the stuff that they're doing, which gives them this all-round CV, which the school looks at to go, wow, I've got to have this kid. And remember that the next school chooses. So that's really important for us.
And is it similar in Kent?
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very similar around year 6 when they have the ISEB. And just a comment about the common entrance now. Some do, some don't. I would say it's not an entrance exam anymore, and it's not particularly common. So it doesn't really fulfill what it used to. And generally, it's a low stakes exam towards the end of their time if the prep school continues with that. But really, they know where they're going, and that place is secure. And really, it's up to the prep school and usually the head to work with the family from about year 5 or 6 onwards to reassure them, to get them into the right school, which is academically and personally appropriate for them at the age of 13.
Great, thanks. And actually, again, you've led me very nicely to my next point. I'm going to ask you all a question again. So, who put your hand up if you've currently got a child in a state primary school rather than a prep school? Great, that was exactly what I thought might happen. In prep schools, part of what you pay for is to have people like Joe and Magoo give you this very sensible, balanced advice because they know the sector really well. If you're not in a prep school, you might be the only child in your year who's even thinking of going to one of the schools you're thinking of going to. I mean, you might not be. There might be a whole cohort, but it's different from being in a prep school. So we've got these two on stage. They give talks to year 4 or 5 parents about how to make choices. Let's get some free advice. So what would you say to your parents if you were addressing them? In terms of how to work out what their child should go for. That's the thing that you don't get if you're in a primary school.
Okay, well, I think listen to on the ground. First of all, you know your child better than anybody else. That's hopefully as a parent, and you know what their strengths and weaknesses are. I think then if you can, try and get out there to find out which schools they might want to go for. It depends. There's bursaries and there's non-bursary places. We offer bursary places too, 100% bursaries to children from the local primary schools, which we visit regularly, and we have great relationships with those heads. Now, if they have people who they might consider us, then we talk to them and they talk to them as well, because they may push you our way, which I think is really important in the local area.
Yeah, I suppose on a more practical level, though, I mean, what I'm thinking is, you might be thinking, I'd really like my child to apply to St Paul's or Westminster or St Paul's Girls or Southampton High, or how do you work out that they may be doing pretty well in their class at school? How do you work out that they're good enough for that?
Well, I think you have to communicate. You have to go and see them. You have to talk to them if you can. You have to talk to your head at your school. It's all about that teamwork and that communication that you need to do. It's not just going to happen for you. You have to actually go out there and help your child.
Yeah, the admissions departments at all senior schools invariably are there for you. They're fonts of knowledge and information about the exact process that you're seeking. So get in touch with the senior schools, speak to the registrar, speak to their admissions teams and find out exactly what they have to offer. That can lead to discussions around scholarships, bursaries, academic levels and what they offer. So I would say always rely on the senior schools, because they really want to work with you to find the right school for your children.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly good advice. Will, what would you, I mean, you've got the admission staff of like 60 odd schools here today. What kind of things would you talk to them about in terms of your child?
I think, just the first thing you want to lead with is your child's burgeoning interests, their personality, the things that how you have seen make them tick. By the time they get into the age of 9 and 10, you'll have a really great idea about this. And Magoo points out, you will know your child best. You don't want to overwhelm them with information, but give them a few tidbits, and hopefully that will excite them to then tell you a bit about those areas of their school and what they look like as a student. This auditorium is just the most perfect place to start if you're not, if you are in the state primary. My children went to state primary and then on to independent schools, and it's been really interesting to see how that was navigated. All that happened actually outside of London. So it is, like all these things, terribly overwhelming to start with. A bit like coming home the Easter holidays as a 16-year-old with your GCSE revision and going, God, there's a lot to do. And it might seem like that, and maybe there is quite a bit to do, but getting started is the absolute key. And, maybe you'll pick some obvious choices. If you're in London, you're going to pick some schools local to you that no matter what school you're at, you will have heard of. You might have walked past them. Start with those. Have a look. go to their website, download the prospectus, read through it, have a think about, is this appropriate? I'm not sure it is. Move on to the next one. If it is, give them a call, get in touch with the admissions department, start conversations if you need to about financial aid. That can be quite a good leveller. Maybe look for categories which will help you sort out a few that stand out, because not every school is for every child, and that's actually the luxury of the system. The amount of choice and variety, particularly outside of London, is massive. And, we're very, very lucky. It's an incredibly well-serviced sector. And, don't be daunted by that diversity. It's something to be happy about, to embrace. Again, like all these things, you've got to be diligent, do your homework. The important thing is get started. And there's nothing like time as a friend. So end of year 4, put your thinking cap on and slowly do your homework. Don't get stressed out. Start early. Give yourself time. And the right answers will come to light.
The great thing today is that even you go to almost any of the stands here and start talking about your child, and the people on the stand will have worked in loads of schools. Collectively, I mean, there's 60 odd schools here, but probably you've got more knowledge about the sector as a whole in one room than you'll ever find in any other situation. And so go and talk to Joe, go and talk to Magoo, and tell them about your child and see what they say. And in other words, you don't just have to go and ask them about the school and get them to do a sort of mini sell. Use it as a chance to have a real conversation about your child.
Just one thing I would say is that they'll do open days and we'll have these lovely events here. But I would say go and see the school in action, have a tour with a pupil, meet the staff and ask questions of the staff and the students who may give you the tours of the school. I always say that to the parents. The open days are excellent, but I would advise then going back and actually meeting the staff and pupils on a normal day and seeing the school in action. And I think that's will always give you a better idea about the school that you're looking at.
So rather than take questions, because we have literally run out of time, I'm going to say save your questions, remember them, and then go and ask someone in the hall. Literally use this as a springboard for a conversation to go and have, like, right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.